Well, I guess it's a time of year here that it's our last book sandwiched in. Louise is in Albany with Library Advocacy Day and wants me to thank everyone for coming. It's been a great series so far. Many thanks to the Book Sandwiched In Committee for the great series, Barb Cook for organizing the kitchen and refreshments, card carrying books and gifts for providing our bookmarks and our books for each presenter, to Marshall Hyde for tech support and the First Congregational Church for the use of this space. If you haven't got a Friends membership, go see Kimberly and get one. You do not have to be a friend to attend our series. So in the future, just know you can bring anybody. Anybody is welcome here. Friday night is trivia night at the library from 7 to 8. Again, if you want to sign up, you don't want to sign up at the library, you can go see Kimberly, or you can just go to the reference desk at the library. A quick reminder, when we're done here today, please pick up your chair and put it on the rack to the left of us. To your right. Today's book is The Art Thief by Michael Finkel. Kirsty Harper Buchanan is going to present it for us and review it for us. She's the former curator of collections and exhibits at the Rockwell Museum and currently executive director of 171 Cedar Arts Center. She has a Master of Arts degree in art history from Southern Methodist University in Dallas. And so that makes her an ideal presenter for this book. She's really into art. The two questions, as you all know, if you've been here before, that we pose, she's answered. And the first question is, what is the first library experience that you remember? And she says, my mother was a librarian, and I remember going into our neighborhood branch in Dallas with her to pick out new books to read. Some of my favorites were the Beatrice Potter collection, Bernstein Bears, and anything by Richard Scarry. As I get older, I volunteered at the summer reading club table and as a page shelving books. So she's been very involved with libraries. Her ideal reading experience is at the beach or in front of the fire when it's snowing. I'd like to thank everybody here for taking time out of your lives to join us. Maybe next year you can definitely come and join us again. Margot has a clipboard and we'd like a little bit of input from you. If you could please tell us what books you would like to see reviewed, either types of books, specific titles, anything that would give us an idea of what you would like to see reviewed in the future. With that, Kirsty.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I'm pleased to be here with you all today. It's always a little daunting getting up in front of an audience, but I am heartened by all the friendly faces, and we've got a great book. I know some of you have read this and some of you haven't. So the approach that I took was to talk more about the art and let you all explore this interesting biography on your own. And we will jump into it. And there will be time for questions at the end, but if you've got a burning question that you just have to ask, please raise your hand and we'll get to it right then. Does that sound good? All right. So, Art Thief. This was a book I had not read until I was invited to come and present, and it made me think. Let's see, we'll get. I think we are. I just want to advance.
Right, so let's make sure we're clicked on that.
Ah, perfect. There we go. Thank you. So thinking about some of the great art thieves in history, Vincenzo Peruggia. I don't know if anyone is familiar with the work that he stole. This work. Yeah, in 1911. And what's surprising, and I think I was struck by this, and maybe some of you all were too, reading how cavalier and casually a lot of this art was stolen. And it was just, being in the right place at the right moment, and somebody took advantage of the opportunity. Perugia took the Mona Lisa out of the frame and wrapped his coat around it and walked out the employee entrance, and it was gone for 2 years. Um, just crazy, I know. So the focus of this book is Stefan Breitweiser. And I kind of peripherally had heard about some of these thefts and this trial in the news, but it was not anything that I had really pursued. But what strikes me, and I pull upon my museum background, is he really took advantage of the good faith effort that small regional museums make to try to put artwork out there and to put it out in an environment that the public can come and visit and you can have a personal interaction with it. Unlike the Mona Lisa, that you have to stand behind a barrier and behind plexiglass, and you have to fight the tourist and the elbows and the selfie sticks to try to get near, that's not the way that it was meant to be viewed or for us to engage with it. And I thought this quote was very telling and very pointed. If it seems many of the museums Brett Weiser plunders are dangerously unprotected, it's because they are. Now, my work at the Rockwell Museum, we are a regional museum, but thankfully we had enough resources to be able to secure works. One of the works, however, that I never worried about being taken was the Bierstadt. Obviously, there's some works that just, you worry more about them getting damaged, but that painting literally does not fit out any of the current doorways at the museum. So it was not a big concern. But unlike that, over the winter holidays, my family and I were visiting New York City, and we went to MoMA, and I took this picture in MoMA. It is a Pierre Bonnard. No, Vuillard, sorry. I'm an American specialist. It's the French painting. So I took this picture because MoMA, we think of them as being, the cream of the crop, this very well-funded big city museum. And what's interesting is here's the detail of their security system. It's a D-ring that's pretty standard, and it's hung on a wall mount that has like a little carabiner clip on it. I don't know if this was wired. I don't get to touch the artwork anymore, especially not in somebody else's museum. But this is pretty basic security. And it was a small work. If somebody wants to take this, they very easily could. In this image, what I wanted to show was the screw and bracket at the bottom center of the frame. And I hope you all can see that in the image. This is a very kind of 1950s and earlier approach to securing work to the wall. And a lot of museum curators don't like it because it's visible, it detracts from the art. But when we think about the way that the book tells us and describes how Brett Weiser was approaching his thefts, his main tool was a screwdriver, and that, in this case, again at MoMA, would have done the job. Now, I know that we're all familiar with Swiss Army knife, and that was specifically what the book said he had used, but I'm pretty sure it was probably a more elaborate, beefed up version. I can't fathom just being able to have a screwdriver and to get at some of the pieces that he was able to get at. One of the works that the book tells us was the first that he took, and really kind of where that seal was broken to begin taking the things that he wanted, was this small ivory miniature of Adam and Eve. And this is from the Rubens House Museum. Here's an image of that. That's in Belgium. And in a lot of the research I did preparing for this, I found this image of Brett Weiser coming back after he has served his prison sentence. So spoiler alert, he did go to prison. This is him in 2018 coming back to that museum under supervision and looking at that work that he had stolen. And you can see it's in this very small plexi case. It's got the little card in front of it. You know, there is no way other than putting this inside a locked vitrine that the Rubens House Museum is really ever going to be able to make sure that that doesn't go in another pocket or under another coat. And sorry, I had 3 flags in my book that I wanted to read rather than putting them up on the slide because I know it's really hard to see. So one of the quotes that really jumped off the page to me was this one. In regional museums, there's sometimes an implicit social pact in force. The museum will permit close access to priceless objects that are marginally secured, and the public in turn will leave those objects undisturbed, respectful of the idea that works of communal heritage, often suffused with spiritual significance and a sense of place, should be open and accessible to all. Brett Weiser is a cancer on this public good. He rewards himself and deprives everyone else. That I thought was a wonderful summation of his philosophy, of Brett Weiser's feeling of entitlement to be able to take what he liked at the expense of everyone else. Now, once he was taking this work, he did not, you know, it's no longer accessible to the public. It is now behind locked door of this home. This is the house of his mother that he lived in Mulhouse. And I just wanted to pull some numbers out because there've been a lot of art thefts, you know, over the centuries, and we're going to wrap up by looking at some of those at the very end of the presentation. But the vast numbers and the speed with which Brett Weiser stole is staggering. And those numbers really, you know, resonate with me. So between this set number of years, 239 artworks from 172 museums, and 110 of them have been recovered. Around $2 billion. And auction estimates of those pieces are even higher. Was there a question? Okay. Now, in that house, sorry, let me go back. The 2 windows on the upper story, those are the actual windows into the attic where Brett Weiser and his girlfriend lived. And I'm not speaking a lot about that relationship and the development of their process in stealing. That's something I'm going to leave to you all to read. I really, it was interesting to know, but I don't think that that was my primary focus, and that wasn't my big takeaway. This sketch, and I know it's a little fuzzy. This is an artist rendering of the inside of the attic, because as they start amassing all of these objects, I was fascinated in my mind to try to create this image. What did that space look like? How did they live? How did they interact with them? And I know I'm stepping away from the camera, so sorry for those on Zoom, but that ivory that we just looked at, they talked about it being on his bedside table where he would reach out and touch it and enjoy the tactile qualities of it, is actually included in this right here. And as I guess kind of you know, a visual sleuth that curators are, I'm always looking for ways to connect the dots, and finding that in this image just made me very happy. You can see a lot of other objects, and this illustration is in the book, so you can go back and look at that at your leisure. I took a photograph out of the book, so that's probably why it's such a bad quality, but I really wanted to include this. The other thing that I found kind of staggering was the arrogance of Brett Weiser, and the fact that he completely didn't really think he would ever get caught. He had this kind of superiority complex, so much so that he made a lot of home videos. And this is a still from one of the videos that was part of his trial, and it's showing him in that attic space in front of artworks that he's stolen. And we're going to go on to look at some of them. If you look in the top left over his right shoulder, the floral still life, that's one that's illustrated in the book. And in the bottom corner, there is the Krennic the Elder painting as well. So we're going to go on. Sybil of Cleves by Krennic the Elder. And what's interesting is there are two versions of a portrait of her by father and son artists at different periods in her life. And it's curious to me to be able to see those, and that he stole both of these from different institutions. It's almost like it was targeted, but we know that it was just impulsive in many cases. This floral still life, the quote in the book that was recorded during his trial was that this work attracted me like a lover. I'm like, yeah, but no, it's a very selfish indulgence to claim something for yourself that really is cultural patrimony that belongs to the common people. This one, this is another quote I wanted to read you all. This one really touched me, the Madeleine de France. So we were looking at the Mona Lisa. This artist, Corneille de Leon, he is the artist that was responsible for bringing the Mona Lisa into France to begin with. And just the fact that one of his works is kind of caught up in this story and this sordid tale was very interesting. But for the portrait and the sitter in 1536, Corneille de Leon painted Francois's teenage daughter, Madeleine. The piece is a feat of artistic restraint, a plain green background, a single strand of pearls and rubies, a straightforward expression, imbuing the work with unreserved sadness. Madeleine suffered from poor health, and rather than shy away from this fate, Leon seemed to capture life's brittle impermanence. A year after this portrait was completed, Madeleine died of tuberculosis at age 16. So that really struck me that this image was captured, the year before she died, and that this was one of the last representations of her that her family had. And again, from the cover of the book, this Boucher, Sleeping Shepherd, this was stolen from the Musée des Beaux-Arts in Chartres. So here is Stefan Brettweiser, a very, very different image than what we saw at the beginning. He's got the Hugo Boss suit, secondhand, that we read about a lot, and a sad face. Oh no, I got caught. And here I am. And after $2 billion worth of art, several years, all of this trouble, 26 months served. And then he gets out, he writes a book, and he's monetizing this. Now, I acknowledge he did not really have a strong resume from a professional standpoint to try to go out and get a job. But it just one of those, there were several moments in this book that I literally had to put it down and walk away. I just kind of had it up to here. One of those moments was when he has the second chance. He has served his time. He's paid his debt to society, and he's going to become an honest man. He's going to get back out there. In the airport, on the way to like his book tour, he shoplifts. And you're like, what are you doing? No. And, his father had kind of come back into his life. There was a little bit of finding peace with that relationship. And then, people just throw their hands up in the air. And he blows it. I mean, he just time and time again, he keeps going back to this addiction. One of the small pieces that he took, this tobacco box with the image of Napoleon on it. This quote from the director, the curator at the museum it had been stolen from. Again, it plays into this precarious balance that any museum has, this fine line that we walk to try to let you engage with the objects, but to try to make sure you don't take them and that everybody can enjoy them. And she says at his trial, when she's on the stand, we are not prepared for this kind of theft. We can't transform our museum into a safe. We serve the public, and we can't adopt any of these Dante-esque methods to try to preserve the art. So it leaves it up to the responsibility of the common people, of the visitors. And the book also talks a lot about when they were stealing, it was during public hours. You know, the galleries might not have been full, but there were other people in the museum. And sometimes keeping your eyes open, if you get a sense and intuition that something's not right, to trust that gut, to say something, maybe to linger, to pay attention to what's going on around you. These are two other objects that were taken. The silver ship was a centerpiece, you know, this high point of German silver in the late 17th century, and the tapestry. And when Brett Weiser is arrested and all of these crimes are connected and the different law enforcement agencies are comparing notes, and they're finally realizing that the spree that had been all throughout Western Europe was one person, it gets very real. And his mother, you know, receives the message he's in prison, they're building a case. She has this moment where she goes and she cleans out the attic. And the silver goes into the canal. This is the Rhone-Rhine Canal. And the tapestry is rolled up and thrown into a ditch. And in a pure twist of ironic fate, the tapestry is found by someone, turned into the police. The police think it's kind of tacky, this old carpet. And so instead of throwing it away, they put it in their rec room under their pool table. So they're walking around, the cops are walking around on like a medieval tapestry playing pool. And then finally, when Interpol comes to them and is like, have you seen this tapestry? They're like, oh, dang, yeah. I think it's upstairs. But just, you know, this, for whatever reason, there's never really a straight answer given by the mother as to what she did, what objects are destroyed. And that is even more frustrating than if we just knew, I think. The silver and the objects of sculpture and the ivories and the carvings and the chalices and the carved wood, they all go, we believe that they went into the canal, and that a lot of them are fished out, but not all of them. Some of them aren't found. As best I could calculate from the information that the book gives us, and then doing some other research, looking at Interpol and looking at, you know, Lost Art Registry, around 129 of the works that he stole out of the 239, 129 of them, they still don't know where they are. They are presumed destroyed. The paintings. So here's the other version of the Sibyl of Cleves by the younger of the Lucas Cranach painters, done later in the sitter's life. This was spoken of in the book, and the research that I did, you know, corroborated that. This is believed to have been the most expensive work that he stole. And it is tiny. It is, I think they said it's like gift card size. So maybe, you know, less than 8 by 10. this is one of the ones that they don't know where it is. And the pieces, the 2D art, the paintings, the works on paper, the drawings, the etchings, those in a separate trip evidently were taken by Brett Weiser's mother. And she just said, into the woods. She took them out into the woods and she set them on fire. And this work, the other cover image from the book by Dürer, and the Madeleine de France, that was considered by the museum that owned it to be the most important work in their collection. And it had actually been on view in the lobby. So the fact that it was taken and unseen during open hours is really staggering. All of those, and I want to actually, let me go back. The last passage I want to read. She sparks a lighter, says Brett Weiser. This sets the pile on fire. Gasoline might have been added as an accelerant, though it probably was not needed. The ancient wood panels are bone dry and oil paints are combustible. Flames rise swiftly. Breitweiser envisions hissing and popping, and the paintings start bubbling. The heat climbs and the paint runs like mascara, streaming over the picture frames and dripping in flaming beads to the soil. Soon the entire stack is engulfed, the fire leaping and ravenous, the great mass burning and charring until there is almost nothing left but ash. This was another point that I had to put the book down and walk away. It's overwhelming when you think of the cultural loss. Okay, so to pivot, before my family and I moved up to Corning, which has been 9 years ago, we lived in Dallas, and I was the director of Western Art for Heritage Auctions out of their Dallas office. That was their global headquarters. And a lot of what I did was authentication. And I saw a lot of forgeries, a lot of fakes, a lot of pieces that were copied. And that is in complete stark opposition to the work that I had done at the Rockwell Museum here in Corning. But some of the resources that are out there now, and definitely in the digital age and with the aid of the internet, it is so much easier to check the authenticity of a painting that you might be buying from a relative, that you might inherit, that you might see at a garage sale, and it says Picasso. Oh my God, is this real? It is not. But you check, you do your due diligence, and the auction houses and the galleries and the museums are all supposed to be doing that, and most of them do. But we are also human, and sometimes museums are short-staffed and there's not funding there. There's a lot of work. Things like this fall through, the cracks. One of the best resources is Art Loss Register. It is a subscription service, unfortunately. But the other one is Interpol. And what's interesting, I knew of Interpol. I had not really done a lot of research into them or had worked with them a lot. But Interpol was created by the UN, International Criminal Police Commission, in 1923. And I thought the slide was very interesting. It has a lot of the stats. It is basically to help close the loophole on criminals that are jumping over borders and doing a little bit here, a little bit there. And just like we saw in the book, it's very, very difficult for law enforcement, who is also and oftentimes underfunded and understaffed, to share their research, share their knowledge, and to try to close the loophole on criminals. So 134 different countries participate and use this as kind of a repository for stolen pieces, found pieces, known offenders. And it is a wonderful tool. Not to be confused, however, with Interpol the band. So that's a joke just for Dusty. Now, again, big left turn. We're going to Egypt. We talked about the individual theft of artwork from public collections, but this is an old and illustrious hobby and livelihood, art theft. And not all of it is done by individuals, and not all of it is done illegally. It might be unethical, it might be questionable, but it still goes on. And I have kind of been on this kick reading about Egypt and Champollion and Mariette and some of the first archaeological digs that were going on in the early 19th century. And I was like, oh, this is the perfect case in point. So here we see a 19th century rendering of Thebes and the pair of Luxor obelisk that used to be in Thebes. And now on the left, you see the image of Thebes as it is now, but oh, there's only one obelisk. Well, hang on, it did load. Okay, the other one is in the Place de la Concorde. And it was given / purchased again in the 18th century. And it was the time period that we saw this happening in this colonial era. And you see it happening in Rome, in Greece, in India, all over. Anywhere that there was a colonial force present, you're starting to see a harvesting of these cultural and historical objects that the Western European countries, feel that the locals don't really appreciate, or they don't really understand, and they aren't taking good care of them. They don't have the means to take care of them. So we're going to take it because we know how to take care of that. And we're going to take it home and put it up. And some of these were purchased. Some of these were taken. I forgot I put this one in here. Coming from Dallas, I also had to reference the Dallas Museum of Art. So some of these more recently were excavated illegally because countries now, especially Italy and southern Italy, they have a lot of laws and they have a lot of regulations governing who gets an excavation permit. What that permit gives you right to. You get to take some pieces home, but they're vetted and approved by the country of origin. The country of origin is keeping basically first choice. So this is an article that was running in the DMA newsletter, I guess, several years ago. And what's interesting is there was a group of acquisitions that had been made in the classics department. And that is my field of research from graduate school. That had been brokered to the museum and offered for sale by at the time, reputable dealer in New York City, and also he worked in Italy. Some of these pieces, it came out, did not have proper paperwork. There wasn't documentation or provenance showing that they had been taken legally. One of these is this volute crater that you see here. And that's actually it was a mid-4th century Apulian, so Southern Italian funerary volute crater, and it was what I wrote my master's thesis on. And it was found to have been in the country and owned by the DMA illegally, and it is one of the pieces that was repatriated. So that hit very close to home for me. But museums in good faith rely, especially for antiquities, rely on dealers and experts to help them find these pieces. And they also are not in every case to be trusted. But back to Egypt, back to some of these spoils of war. I think some of these will be familiar to you all. The Elgin marbles, that's and this is a restoration of those, but the pediment carvings from the Parthenon in Athens. That is one of the earliest and one of the most famous cases of these were purchased and sold in Athens, taken back to London. They are on view currently in the British Museum. There have been huge calls to return these by supporters of that museum, as well as the Greek government and a lot of other governments in the region. And this battle still rages. Below that, I included images of the Benin bronzes. Those were forcibly taken, again, by the British, but they are definitely not the only ones that did that. These were taken as punitive spoils of war during a colonial conquest in Africa. Again, some have been returned, not all of them, and it's very muddy. And then the other image, some of the pieces of our own national identity and heritage were given or purchased. But as we look back from a more realistic perspective of the imbalance of those relationships, a lot of these pieces were taken and purchased under coercion. And so does that entitle the owner to truly have free title to it? Or is there more to the story that needs to be considered? And then I'm looking at time. Oh, good. I wanted to end just with this image, and it is, I hope that you all can see this. It's an image, if you're familiar with the Monuments Men, this is one of the archival photographs of the hoard of Nazi stolen art that was found in the castle. And I should have looked up the castle. I don't know if it's Neuschwanstein, but it's a nice castle, as you can see by the architecture in the image. But this trafficking in art and this need to dominate art is not just unusual, nowadays. It's ancient. And I think that there is the deep-seated human compulsion. It speaks to us. It is emotional. Some people struggle with that. Some people like Stefan Brettweiser, who don't have enough emotion in their lives, are looking for other surrogates to fill those gaps. But, if you look for the human being in this photograph, it is really telling. He's so diminutive next to these vast piles of crates and artwork. And I thought we would end on that. So, questions, comments, and I'm going to try to bring the microphone to y'all so we can hear the questions and the answers.
I have two questions. One, did Brettweiser's mother was she ever held responsible for what she did? And the other one, before I give this back, is there was a lot of artwork stolen from the Isabella Gardner Museum in Boston, and last I knew, they had never found any and didn't know where it had gone. Do you know any update on that?
All right, so the first question, Brettweiser's mother, she did serve time. It was a minor sentence. And I don't know off the top of my head, but she was very uncooperative, I guess we'll say, with the authorities, and has never, ever fully acknowledged what she did with the artwork and what pieces were lost and why she did it. She kind of had developed this pat answer that she was so angry with her son for this addiction he had and for him stealing under her roof, and she knew nothing about it, and she was outraged, and she destroyed the art to hurt him and to punish him because she knew how much he cared for it. Well, at the beginning of my presentation, there was a still from a video filmed in her home, and she's actually captured later on that tape, being asked kind of point blank and just plain dumb, I guess. But as a parent, you know, it's tempting, but you reach a point where you're not doing them any favors, right? You have to teach some boundaries. So the other, oh, Isabella Stewart Gardner. So I read a book about that heist, and Marshall and I were just speaking about that. There were three major paintings that were stolen, and they have never found them. And that museum is so unusual because part of their charter, the patron dictated that none of the artwork can ever be moved. Everything has to stay on view exactly the way that he had it in his home, and you can't move a thing. It's like, that's a curatorial nightmare. It's like, why, why would you take that job? But the empty carved giltwood frames are still up on the wall, showing where those pieces were taken. And I can't remember the name of that book, but it's a really good one. And again, it was an author, kind of a journalistic background that was following up on that. They believe that those had been destroyed in the process of shuffling them around and using them as leverage kind of in the black market. Yes.
I read a book.
Oh, here, do you want the microphone? All right, fair enough. I'll repeat the question when it's done.
I read a book about it based on this. Museum text. It's called The Art Forger by Barbara Shapiro. And
Ah,
it's
okay.
fiction, but it's based on that. And I thought it was great because it talks about forgery. And this woman is an expert forger, and about how you forge artwork and how it's done, and all these other things in it. But it was a fascinating book, but it was based on the text.
So just a comment for the people on Zoom about the book by Barbara Shapiro, The Art Forger, and a fictional kind of approach to the Gardner heist. Yes, Marshall.
Since we're. There's, look, I can't remember the name of the FBI agent who became the head of their fine art division. He was not an art trained, guy at first, but he got put into that role. He really educated himself, very knowledgeable, talks about forgery all around the world. There were theories that Whitey Bulger and some of the Irish mob
Yep.
had stolen them. There were reports that they were in Ireland being sold to raise money for the Irish Republican Army. There's all kinds of different theories.
Yeah.
Really fascinating stuff. They're wonderful rabbits to go down. Of course, as Kirsty said, there's always the moment when you have to put the book out because what happens to the artwork is just so unbearable.
Yeah. And the guy's name was like Bob or Bill or something like that. I want to say I got to hear him speak in Dallas, and he started this kind of art theft division in American law enforcement, and they don't hire art historians. Unfortunately, they hire law enforcement, FBI agents, and they teach them about art. And I thought that was interesting, which skill set was prioritized. Yes, Peggy.
It's one, and for those of you that haven't read the book, it's a very easy read.
It is.
It's fast, it's compelling. You're not gonna want to put it down. So, while the subject is real, it's worth reading. The other is, I will never go to a museum again that has a little cardboard sign saying
Yeah.
removed for
Study.
because that was one of his ploys for not getting caught.
And I almost put a slide in with that. So for those on Zoom, the question was, the book is a very easy read. And I did intentionally leave this kind of narrative of the family and the relationship and the human element of it. Not a lot of spoilers on that. So that will be your motivation and reading the book. But the other thing Peggy commented on was this very clever leveraging of human nature, that for some of the pieces that were stolen out of cases, where he wasn't taking everything in the case, he would leave this little sign, and all museums do this. And I mean, even at MoMA, I saw it several times. Objects removed for study, or case and I'm trying to think what we used to do. It's like reinstallation in progress, installation in progress. So if I was in my own museum and I was walking through and I saw that, I wouldn't question it. I was like, oh, somebody needed that for an educational outreach, or there was a school tour, or we've got an image request and we're having to photograph it. But it's buys them just enough time. Yeah. Dusty.
Sure, this is in the category of things you would consider spoiler or don't really want to get into, but you know, you're an art, you're a lover of art, knowledgeable about it. Was he a lover of art?
Yeah, the question was he a lover of art? Was Stefan Brettweiser a lover of art? Yes. And not to be too self-indulgent as like an armchair psychologist, but I think it was the only thing that reliably mirrored his own reflection back, or his own affection back to him. You'll hear in the book, you know, some problems with the family, and that, you know, we have to acknowledge that as a root cause. But certainly as individuals, we have free will to choose how we want to move forward from that experience. And, you know, looking at a room full of people, we've all had trials and tribulations, but we're not art thieves. At least I don't think we are. I don't know about Nancy. I can joke with her because Nancy was the librarian at the Rockville Museum for many years, 40 years. Yeah. And we couldn't have done half of what we did without her support. Forgive me for, but yeah, I think he did love the art, and I think that he fixated on it, and he loved it in a very unhealthy manner, but he loved it in a selfish manner too, because he excluded anybody else from having the opportunity to appreciate it. And that also, I think, surfaces in his interpersonal relationships, that he's very myopic and focusing on what he wants at the exclusion of anybody else. What are other thoughts on that one? I'm curious to hear, because that's a deep question.
Didn't he mention something, I can't remember the exact language, a creed or something like that, or? You know, so-
Yes.
There we go. Upload it.
Yeah, accord de coeur had been mentioned as part of, I think, in his depositions, that he talked about this like thunderclap that came over him when he saw something like the floral still life that we had looked at. And he said, oh, I was drawn to it like a lever, that it was a very visceral reaction that he had to the paintings. There was another, yes.
It was him. I don't think it was the author. I think it was Stefan who, you know, talked about those themes who kind of out. Saying.
Mm-hmm.
So along those lines, I think he really did appreciate and said it in a very unhealthy way.
Yeah. And he didn't, I never got a sense at any point in the story that he felt like what he had done was wrong. He seemed to feel, because of his love, that he was entitled and that he was a custodian of them. He wasn't stealing them. He was just borrowing them, and that he cared for them and he took care of them. And as opposed to cutting them out of the frame, which is what happened at the Gardner heist, just to kind of bring this back. And it is one of the reasons that those canvases probably are destroyed, because the not to museum nerd on you, but you've got two different materials. You've got a very flexible fabric canvas, and you've got a very rigid, inflexible paint layer. And you combine these, so paintings are always, from the moment that they're finished, they're always in a state of deterioration and half-life. You know, they only have a shelf life of so long, and we try to prevent that. But when you cut a painting out of a frame, and especially a large old canvas, and you roll it, you are creating breaks in that rigid, thin paint layer as the support behind it moves, and it's going to start flaking off. And as soon as you unroll that, I I would put money on it that within a couple of weeks, definitely within the first year that those things had been out of their frames, they were gone. Unfortunately, yes.
It seems like a very slight sentence. You see both.
The I think what they were going out for or going after was much larger, but because he was in all these different countries and he had been in prison awaiting trial and sentencing for 18 months or more before he even got his day in court. So I think some of it was mitigated. But the man that stole the Mona Lisa, boy, I had just looked at this. I want to say that he had like 6 months or maybe less, and that he was let go because he was enlisting for World War I. And, you know, there was motivation uh, in other areas. But yeah, it does seem like a slight sentence, and it's very difficult when you've got a French national that has committed a crime in Switzerland, and it's a government um, um, a government museum as opposed to a private museum. You know, there's so many little loopholes that people can wiggle out through. Yes, in the back.
Off the picture with the Nazi stolen art, there was just a court case where a woman who lived in California back during the war had a Picasso taken from her Nazis, and it ended up in a Spanish museum. And they've been fighting for years, the family, to try to get that picture back, and the California court just ruled now, no, it's going to stay at the museum. Thoughts on that, saying, you know, how we love art and art should be accessible to everyone. But
Boy.
this was stolen from a family and now is in a museum. And what are your thoughts on the stolen work?
So the question, just to summarize, is regarding stolen Nazi art. When a family has a legitimate claim, but a museum has purchased and spent a lot of acquisition funds to acquire something like that and is making it accessible to the public, you know, where is the right answer for that? That is muddy water for sure. That's the day I'm glad I'm an American art specialist and not. Yeah, there are very few clear-cut answers. You know, obviously, I'm in support of repatriation to the rightful owner, especially when something catastrophic like war or genocide happened, when people were targeted and so many lives were destroyed. But there also is an acknowledgement that you would be taking something that was on public view and you would now be sequestering it behind closed doors, and you don't know when or if it will ever surface again. So it's difficult, and not to even get into the legal issues and the financial compensation issues. Yeah,
Just.
yes.
So much of this stuff overlaps, you know,
Mhm.
whether it's wars and disappearance or artists. You mentioned the artist who brought the Lisa
Hmm.
to Francis, was one of the stolen, you know, he worked with one of the stolen pieces.
Yeah,
So this question. He was
that's right.
in the theft of the Mona Lisa.
That's right.
Radical group artists and wise guys, you know, the wise guys, but wise guys. And so he was a suspect. and they brought him in and interrogated him. The Italian-born printmaker that worked at the Louvre who stole, the Mona Lisa. When he decided to get rid of it, he tried to sell it. He contacted an Italian dealer to sell it, and they spun it. And when he got caught with it, they spun it as he was trying to repatriate it. So this is Italian art. I'm bringing it back to Italy.
Yeah.
France for those people can't possibly appreciate it. And I think that contributed to part of this very
Light sentence.
sentence.
That's a very good
Afterwards,
point.
Where they talked about it, they talked about how he's trying to repatriate diaper. Here, we're spoken trying to,
Yeah.
turn that into a monetary thing. So, yeah. And perhaps in this Picasso piece, the court felt that, Picasso is a Spaniard, if it's at a Spanish museum. It's not the Elgin marbles.
Yeah.
They weren't taken in that way, the colonial fact, but, those questions about, national patrimony, for a piece of art.
And
are issues.
as you kind of alluded to, Perugia was celebrated in Italy. He was championed for bringing this national treasure that those French had back to Italy. And yeah, a very kind of slap on the wrist sentence. Yes.
One time I was a director of the museum. And we're at the very beginning of your presentation, you talked about how difficult it is to be protected. These things be prepared. The individual buildings. Thousands of exhibits. So some of these minerals are.
Oh yeah.
$1,000.
Very valuable.
But they're not insured because the Canadian government owns them, so there's no insurance company there, and you can't have guards all over the place watching this, and they hide them behind layers and layers of protection, one barrier after another, like what we say is now. Eventually, you're not really doing the artist really wanted, what we really would like to have happen, which is intersection of something.
And then visitation drops too.
So I understand that.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of our big huge exhibit areas had minerals, had like gems and minerals. A piece of gold that's that big, how are you gonna protect that?
Yeah, and that's you bring up an interesting point, because that type of a collection of minerals and gemstones has an intrinsic value separate from a specimen value, as opposed to an art museum, unless you are looking at like decorative pieces that have jewels and gemstones in them. You've got fabric and paint and wood. It's a different type of way that we place value on it. But yeah, I think if you haven't worked in a museum, the person off the street would think, oh, it's kind of stuffy. Those are people that feel very entitled to try to translate what they have to us, like we're not going to know about them. There's a little bit of patronism, I guess, perceived there. And when you work in a museum, every ounce of your being is focused on, how do we get this out on view to the public? How do we remove barriers of accessibility, from not just mobility standpoints, but from financial standpoints, to have a membership or tickets, for visual impairments, for access and egress around pedestals and wayfinding and signage. And there's so much that they're charged with, and it's almost an impossible task. And this is the nonprofit sector. So everybody that works there, they're not working there to get rich, because they're not gonna, it's a passion. It's your calling. It's what you want to do. So I'd love to visit with you more about the collection that you helped oversee. Yeah. Yes.
average person doesn't understand. When you walk into a museum or an infrastructure in which there are exhibits, where I feel it's like over there, you're expected to look and stay looking. You're not supposed to touch.
Yeah.
It's American. You see people walk in with families and they, first thing you know, somebody's trying to touch something. Can't get up to stop. And I know it's a small, one, but it's.
It was massive.
And.
Yeah.
Not the water with intrinsic value. One of the things. One of the things that keeps getting stolen after stolen after stolen are crystal balls.
Oh.
It's amazing how often those things get stolen and they show up at a private sale. If anybody thinks, 2 or 3 pieces of a Tyrannosaurus Rex, especially if you've got the head, it's like $10, $15 million US.
Mhm. And hard to trace.
It's
Yeah.
This thing goes from, and those things never show up in another cultural institution. They always show up in somebody's.
Yeah, a private collector.
Anyway,
Yes. Yes, exactly. Nice callback. The touching, though, yes, and I also acknowledge that going into a museum and wanting to touch it, it's not just a childhood impulse, but it's part of how we want to connect with things. We want that tactile interaction. We're looking, we're smelling, what is around us. We're aware, we're monitoring our senses, we're listening, and that's such a personal thing. There are or let me do this instead. Next time you are in a museum, look for bronze sculptures that are in the lobby or in the hallways, and look for what is accessible for people to touch. It's usually going to be a foot. And you can see what they touch because it's going to have a dark brown patina all over it, except the area that's burnished bright shiny gold is where everybody touches it. And every museum has one of these. In the Rockwell Museum, it's the rattlesnake on the Bronco Buster. And we finally put it under a cover to try to keep it from being ruined, because it's just, it's intoxicating. People want to touch it. And at the DMA, there was a Roman sculpture that had the left foot forward that was up on a plinth, so that it put the foot like almost at eye level. And that foot was shiny and gold. And until they put it under glass, it's going to continue to be touched.
Kirsty, were you involved in bringing that artist to the Rockwell, the blind artist?
Michael Naranjo. That was I was thinking of that when you were talking. There was a really cool exhibition that we did at the Rockwell Museum several years ago when I was still the curator there. And it was the work of Michael Naranjo, and he is a blind bronze sculptor of the American Southwest. And the title of the show was Please Touch. And one of his requirements for being able to put an exhibition of his work on view is that the public has to be allowed to touch them, because as a blind sculptor, that is the only sense that he is able to use when he's creating his work. And it was wildly popular. And it made it so much difficult in the whole rest of the museum and every other gallery to say, don't touch here, but you can touch over here. But only like for this one short-term exhibition. Yeah. Yes.
I lead school tours around.
Yes.
I'm gonna say that is the best museum I've been in for a long time. But that exhibit, the kids were just mesmerized by it. We can really touch this, because we spend a lot of time before we go upstairs saying,
Yeah.
don't touch until I tell you to.
And the Rockwell did, just to give a shout out to them, since I moved on to my new position, they have acquired one of the pieces that was in that exhibition that is on view. So I believe the Spirit Dancer, it was the one of the Eagle Dancer that has on a pair of wings that is down and has this wonderful wingspan. That I believe is up on view now.
And to bring all the library. And one of the decent.
Yes.
parties, they went,
Yes,
"People
that's
want
right.
the Library for months.
Marshall had mentioned that there was a collaboration between the Rockwell Museum and the Southeast Steuben County Library, that one of the pieces that we had received for that Naranjo exhibition was placed right in front of the circulation desk at the library for the duration of the public dates. And it was an invitation to touch that work, but also to invite people that might not come into the museum, might not have been exposed to art or have an interest, to come into the museum, because the library has a Rockwell membership that you can check out and use to go for free. And then you turn it in just like it was a book or a DVD or something. And that's one of the peer partnerships that we were very excited about, that helps us remove obstacles of accessibility here in our own town. So I don't want to take too much time, but I'm happy to keep going with questions. Yes.
Something you said. And I'll translate it into what my experience has been. It's almost impossible nowadays to be let's say, responsible in any sense, curator, president, board member, whatever. And try to judge something with the 2024 timescale and ethics and everything, and try to find out how you're going to deal with something that happened 100 years ago, or even less, a couple of thousand years ago. And so we had issues of our museum, which originally called the Canadian Museum of Ancient Civilization. We had skeletons of
Human remains. Yeah.
they were captured at the time. I read you just nobody around anymore to tell you why they did this.
Yeah.
You know,
And you have to, right, and you have to make right.
say, well, nobody can even tell. There's nothing written anywhere. Even says we gave or we did not give permission.
Mhm.
Nowadays it's 2000 and we're using our values and our standards. It's not, we have to do all this stuff.
Yeah, it's an ethical quandary for sure. How institutions address human remains in the collection. I don't know a Canadian government response to First Nations, like from a curatorial approach, but in America, we've got NAGPRA, the National Native American Graves Repatriation Act, and it is in place to try to give some guidance and some parameters to institutions that find themselves in these sticky situations that they did not create for themselves, but they're still charged with trying to make it right. And it's muddy water. Yeah,
Sometimes it's not even human remains. I mean,
it could be
understand that.
funerary grave goods or,
We had something
yeah.
before that in the old days, or some survey. It's geological survey. We go out and find an abandoned village with a part of the totem pole. We're bringing totem people.
Yeah.
We're bringing totem pole. Right there.
It is. It's so the souvenir hunting. Yeah. Thank you all very much. I appreciate your kindness in hearing me speak today.